Today, I will be showing you 3 of my favourite mistakes that I have ever discovered, and how they became part of my daily routine. And by the end of this video, you'll have access to something that I use every single day while mixing. I'll explain how this giveaway works a little later on. The last time we received one of these from Andy, it involved us travelling all the way across England to discover what differences rooms make when recording drums. And if you haven't seen that journey just yet, I highly recommend that you check it out by clicking the pop-up that's up here somewhere. But if you have seen it, well then I think you are highly talented, very attractive, and incredibly smart. And yes, as always, there will be cats. But first, using templates is bad? You see, the process of mixing has evolved somewhat ever since I started out, but one thing that has always held some kind of stigma is the use of templates. When I was younger, I thought it meant that if I did use them, then I was somehow bad at my job. And I was torn because I genuinely found using templates incredibly useful, and it left me, initially, feeling like a fraud. Which didn't make a lot of sense, because to me, if I was ever to run a large commercial studio, which, would have a huge desk and a lot of outboard, it would be expected for the studio to have a assistant. Where is Nathan?
Did you let him come down from the loft?
We should probably go check on Nathan.
Yeah.
Let's go find Nathan.
Come on.
You alright, mate?
Can I come down now, please?
And do what?
Well, I used to build your mix sessions.
Yeah, but I've got a template now.
But we used to do the things and...
You're doing great here. In a bit, mate.
George!
That's right.
Please!
You see, all my sessions tend to have a high track count, and in order to work through all this audio without feeling overwhelmed, I typically default to loading my routing template. This template organises the routing and workflow of every source of audio, from drums through to additional production, vocals and sound effects. Without a template, the setup could look and sound something a little like this. Yeah, I didn't enjoy that so much. There's a little too much information to know what to do with, and this is where my routing template comes into play. Oh, I've run out. More? I get the question. And here's my counter. How many of you have done something similar to this? You've opened up a brand new session, dumped the files in, and then started loading plugins and presets in some sort of vague attempt to make sense of what's going on. Now, that would be very much like me trying to make some delicious pour-over coffee without really knowing what to do. I know what the outcome is. I want to have a nice coffee, but then how much coffee versus water do I need? In order to solve this, I use a guide. It is a brewing ratio method that allows me to understand the starting place for getting something that I might enjoy. And just like having a recipe guide for this coffee, the template route is simply a more organised starting point that allows for chaos or tweaking to my taste afterwards. Instead, let me show you what the same set of files sound like going through the routing template with just some basic initial adjustments. Right, for me, this is a much better starting point, and this is why. The way that this is designed is it's semi-top-down mixing with having these master buses up here. Every piece of audio will find its way into one of these 4 buses at some point during the mix stage. The outside bus is for when something does not suit the band bus, the post-production bus, or the a cappella. Really straightforward. All of these feed into the 2 bus, which allow us to do mix bus processing pre-master or mix bus riding in terms of volume, pre-master as well. Super, super flexible. Outside of that, the most amount of management that happens is typically with drums, because when we are working with modern metal drums, there is a lot of information to deal with. So this is something that I've inherited from other producers. Essentially, all the microphones for a certain kit piece go into its dedicated bus, which then gets fed. So I recently have been mixing with just a shell bus, doing all the shell, compression and EQ, and then the cymbals and rooms will go outside of that to the band bus. So I'm not over compressing the rooms or over compressing the cymbals around the shells. Fairly straightforward. All the bus goes to bus, all the guitars go to guitars, all the production goes to production. And it's designed in such a way so that everything is collapsible to be very neat and tidy, so that when I want to focus on something, I just expand what I am looking to look at. For me, a template is supposed to reduce the mundane tasks that get repeated with every session. The only time a template may be bad is if it's preloaded with extremely heavy processing, but even then you're likely learning something useful still from those mistakes. The perfect scenario here is that the template simply facilitates the work that you want to do. The same way that back in the day, you would have had an assistant set up the desk for you at the beginning of every session. Oh, and to save yourselves the hassle of having to recreate my workflow from scratch, I will be sharing this template with you a little later on. On to the next point. I don't know where this solo rule first kicked off from. This is, of course, the rule of never mix in solo, only make changes with everything active in the mix. The problem is that this guidance can be really useful, but with incorrect context or direction, it can be really, really misleading. The latter is obviously what is true for me in my first few years, and it led to a lot of mistakes that could have been easily avoided if a few words were changed around. A better word of advice would be mute first, solo second. The reason why this is better with mute first, solo second is because it can be tricky to maintain our objectivity when only using solo. Let me show you. So this is the most congested section of the song. This is the chorus moment where there's drums, guitars, synthesis, bass, loads of stuff going on. Now, there is a region of aggression that happens when we have cymbals and guitars working up against each other, and it's in the upper mids. I've noticed this already. I would like to try and neuter that and make the song more pleasant to listen to, but I don't know where to start. Now, typically, if I was starting out, I might go hunting around by soloing. So I would listen to the section. I hear the aggression, but I don't know where to find it. Now, I could go through soloing. I hear aggression here, but I also hear aggression in the guitars. I am none the wiser for going through and soloing. However, if I do the inverse and I mute, there's my answer. As soon as the cymbals went away, the thing that I was hearing as aggression disappeared. So now it's time to EQ that bit of aggression out of the way and see what happens. It's about there. I've just made a huge difference in order to allow for the guitars to sit a bit better up against the cymbals, give my mix a bit more breathing room before I even start. And now I'm no longer dealing with that congestion that can happen. And the likelihood is actually it's probably there in the rooms too. Yeah, I hear it there. And now that I know what I'm listening for, note that I'm using solo in order to find that region. Oh, awful. Bringing it out of the way. And then returning back to the mix to hear everything in context. And just so for comparison, this is without. And this is with. Two really small changes made very, very quickly without an awful lot of effort in order to go and find it. This is a great example of that practice working where you mute first and solo second in order to resolve the problem. Drum samples are bad, and you're a bad mixer if you can't mix drums raw without them. Oh, okay, yeah, this one is a whole can of worms. And let me just state that it actually sent me for a long, long time. Popular opinion when I started out was that using samples of any kind was a cop-out. It meant you were either a bad engineer, a bad mixer, or both. It became fashionable to not want to use samples. So as a result, I mixed a lot of records without using any close mic samples in order to master this approach. And now, in retrospect, I'm not sure how beneficial any of this actually was in the end. As you can see in this session here, we have the snare live mics and an additional track which has a sample on it, which is from the sample set that we caught during the recording of these drums. You can get a copy of these samples for yourself if you go and watch the first video in this series. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you the live mics without the sample and then with the sample, and then we will discuss what's happening here. Okay, and now with. Okay, what do you hear? I'm going to give you your opportunity to write and post it down below. Okay, this is what I hear. The sample is allowing us to have the opportunity to bring back the sustain and extension of the snare that naturally exists pre-gating. This is the tail of the snare, which is vital for me considering the way that I like to stack compression and saturation on snares, especially considering the way that gates, specifically drum gate, works in this case. Before you in the comments start going, we'll just move the mics, it's not as simple as that. I'll explain. Come with me. Off we go. Right, here we are. I found a snare for you. This is the snare from the recording session, and during the recording session, the miking setup looked something like this. Depending on how the kit is set up, we can expect to hear bleed from multiple sources, and we don't really want them to appear in the snare mic, and that would be like hi-hat, tom, and ride. The proximity of these additional kit pieces to the snare affect the level that the bleed is going to come in at. This is either amplified or negated by the choice of microphone that is used when tracking. And in some cases, the microphone that has the best rejection has a terrible tone for capturing that source signal. Regardless of what gating approach is chosen, there is going to be a trade-off. This is what I do to try and fix that in as few steps as possible. The approach I try to take is to get as natural a gated sound as possible. And this is what that sounds like. And by comparison, this is what the raw snare sounds like. These are the settings that I'm using in Drumgate, and yes, you will get a preset, so don't worry. And then this is what the samples that I'm using are bringing back to the signal in combination with the gated raw snare. What I'm trying to achieve here is what the snare sounds like without gating, while using gating. It's really difficult to maintain that sustained tail without other nasties creeping back in. It can be really tricky sometimes, you know? I started out trying to impress people by not using samples, and funnily enough, the very same people would turn out to never really care how I mixed the songs in the first place. What I'd learned are the benefits of both approaches, and then decided to combine them into a super malleable toolkit. Learn the pros and cons of both, and make it work for you. If it sounds good, it is good. The end. Don't forget to grab yourself a copy of the template from the link in the description down below. Drop a like, leave a comment, and hit subscribe so that you don't miss out. Everyone, thank you very much for coming along. Don't be a dick. I'll see you next time. And hopefully Andy's happy now, right?
Well, Andy might be happy, but you did promise the audience some cats.
Yep, I promised cats. Here are your cats. Thank you. You did it. You got to the end. Cats, go.